Daf Yomi, Tractate, Zevachim, page 51. Top of the page, but actually it's in the middle of the idea. So, as usual, let's go to the bottom of the previous Amud to get a little bit of context. The Mishnah, this is the bottom of 50b. The Mishnah continues that Rabbi Meir said, my opinion can be proved via a kal v'chomer inference. And just as with regard to the carcass of an animal, which transmits impurity to a person through touching it and carrying it, its slaughter nevertheless purifies its treifa from its impurity. With regard to the carcass of a bird, which possesses less severe impurity, as it does not transmit impurity through touching it and carrying it, but only when it is in the throat. Is it not logical that the slaughter purifies its treifa from its impurity? And once it is established that slaughter purifies a bird that is a treifa, it can be derived. Just as we found with regard to a bird's slaughter that it permits for its consumption, and now we're turning to 51a. Metaheres treifasa mitumaso af meliko shemach shalta bachila taher treifasa mitumasa. Okay. And it purifies its treifa from its impurity. So too is pinching, which permits bird offerings with regard to consumption, should purify its treifa from its impurity. Rav Yossi Omer, Daya kinivlas be'matayra, sheshchita sumitada, velo malikasa. Rav Yossi says, although one can derive from the case of an animal that slaughter purifies the treifa of a bird from its impurity, that derivation cannot be extended to pinching. The same restriction that applies to every a fortiori inference, namely that a halacha derived by means of an a fortiori inference is no more stringent than the source from which it is derived, applies here. It is sufficient for the halachic status of the carcass of a bird that is a treifa to be like that of the carcass of an animal of a kosher species that is a treifa, meaning excuse me, that only its slaughter purifies it, but not its pinching. Okay? Velohi, and that is not so. The Gemara rejects this proof, and that is not so. That is not so. Let it remain there, meaning one cannot learn from it, as that is a case that comes from the slaughter of non-sacred animals. The halacha of the pinching of a consecrated bird is derived through a paradigm from the halacha of the slaughter of a non-sacred bird, and the halacha of the slaughter of a non-sacred bird is derived through an a fortiori, a kal v'chomer inference, from the halacha of the slaughter of a non-sacred animal. Outside of the realm of consecrated matters, there is no question that a matter derived via one of the hermeneutical principles can then teach its halacha via another principle. The entire question under discussion is only with regard to the realm of consecrated matters. Davar halamed b'binyan av mahu shilamed behekesh u'b'gzera shava v'kal b'chomer u'b'binyan av. The Gemara asks, what is the halacha as to whether a matter derived via a paradigm can teach its halacha to another matter via a juxtaposition, or via a verbal analogy, or via a kal v'chomer inference, or via a paradigm? They call binyan av a paradigm, but I'm not exactly sure what that kind of limud is, but anyway, they call it a paradigm. Peshot miha chadamat mipnei ma'amul lan bedaf kasher sharei lan memurin kasher lan memurin kasher sharei lan bebasar kasher. The Gemara states resolve at least one of those questions. The Gemara cites a lengthy braita before stating the resolution inferred from that braita. For what reason did the sages say that in the case of blood left overnight, it is fit? Meaning, if blood of an offering had been left overnight and was then placed on the altar, it need not be removed. This is as it is in the case of sacrificial portions, where if they are left overnight, they are fit. From where is it derived? In the case of sacrificial portions which are left overnight, they are fit. This is as it is in the case of meat, where if it is left overnight, it is fit because the meat of a peace offering may be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. From where is it derived that if an offering that has left the temple courtyard is then placed on the altar, it need not be removed? This is derived by paradigm, since an offering that leaves its area is fit in the case of an offering brought on a private altar. An offering that leaves its area is fit in the case of an offering brought on a private altar, so that would include all altars. I think so. Being on a paradigm is like there's one set viewpoint. Paradigm means like a way of seeing things, and it applies to the whole thing. So if a bama, I mean it's kind of like a kavachomer, if a bama, or just whatever applies to one applies to all. That if an offering leaves its area, it's fit in the case of offering on a private altar. So then the same thing is by the temple. Tameh. From where is it derived that if an offering that has become ritually impure is placed on the altar, it need not be removed? This is derived by paradigm, since one is permitted to offer an impure offering in the case of communal rites. Meaning communal offerings. In the case of necessity, the communal offerings may be sacrificed even if they are ritually impure. From where is it derived that in the case of an offering that was disqualified due to the intention of the priest who slaughtered it due to consume it beyond its designated time, pigul, if it was placed on the altar, it need not be removed. The halakha applies there. Since the sprinkling of its blood affects acceptance on the offering, notwithstanding its status of pigul. Status of pigul takes effect only if the sacrificial rites involving that offering were otherwise performed properly. This indicates that it still has the status of an offering, so it need not be removed from the altar. From where is it derived that in the case of an offering that was disqualified due to the intention of the priest who slaughtered it to consume it outside its designated area, if it was placed on the altar, it need not be removed? This is derived by a paradigm, since it is juxtaposed to an offering that was slaughtered with intent to consume it beyond its designated time. Okay. Shekiblu pesulin. From where is it derived that in the case of an offering for which priests who are disqualified collected and sprinkled its blood, if it was placed on the altar, it need not be removed? This is derived from the halacha of these priests, who are generally disqualified because they are impure yet, or fit to perform the communal rites, meaning to sacrifice communal offerings when all the priests or the majority of the Jewish people are impure. In any event, the halacha of the sacrificial portions was derived via a paradigm from the halacha of meat that was left overnight, and then the halacha of blood was derived via a paradigm from the halacha of the sacrificial portions. Evidently, a matter derived via a paradigm can teach its halacha to another matter via a paradigm. The Gemara questions the derivations of the Brayta, but can one deduce the halacha of a matter that is not fit, meaning sacrificial portions, which are disqualified due to having been left overnight, from the halacha of a matter that is fit, meaning the peace offering, which is permitted to be eaten for 2 days and 1 night? Similarly, how can the Brayta derive the halacha of meat that was removed from the temple courtyard from the halacha of a private altar, which has no sacred area surrounding it? You know what? I was just going to ask that question. I was literally going to ask that question. That how do you build a binyan of, have one basic generality of taking meat away from an area of sacred, but a private altar, it's not a sacred area, at least not in the same way. That was on the tip of my tongue, figuratively speaking. I was about to ask that, and here the Gemara is asking that. I guess it's just logic, It's just, when you learn the Gemara, it's like there's some basic rules of logic, so if you tap into that, it's like anyone can access logic. Okay. The Gemara answers the Tana relied on the verse, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. It is that which goes up on its firewood upon the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall thereby keep burning, Leviticus 6:2, which amplified it, teaching that many types of disqualified offerings may be left upon the altar. The derivations written in the Brayta are mere supports for those halachot. My time the Mishnah teaches, with regard to the sin offerings whose blood is presented inside the sanctuary, as the remainder of the blood which is left after the sprinklings, a priest would pour it onto the western base of the external altar. But if he did not place the remainder of the blood on the western base, it does not disqualify the offering. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that it must be poured on the western base? The Gemara answers, the verse states, with regard to the bull offering of the priest, and the priest shall sprinkle the blood upon the corners of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tent of meeting, and all the remaining blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Leviticus 4:7. This means that he must pour it on that base which he encounters first when he leaves the temple of meeting, which is the western base. Tanu Rabbanon, and Yisod Mizbeach Ha'oilo, V'lo Yisod Mizbeach Ha'pnimi. The sages taught in the Brayta. These are the verses that contain. The sages taught in Brayta. There are 3 verses that contain the same phrase with regard to the pouring the remainder of the blood of a bull offering to the high priest. The verse states, all the remaining blood of the bull he shall pour out the base of the altar of burnt offering, Leviticus 4:7. This teaches that it must be on the base of the external altar, but not on the base of the inner altar, where he had sprinkled the blood. The Brayta continues, with regard to the bull sacrificed for unwitting communal sin offering. This verse states, and he shall sprinkle the blood upon the corners of the altar, which is before the Lord, that is in the tent of meeting. And all the remaining blood shall you pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Leviticus 4:18. This teaches that the inner altar itself has no base at all. And Yisod Mizbach Olah. Ten Yisod Mizbach Olah. Finally, the verse states with regard to the sin offering of a king, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it upon the corners of the altar of burnt offering, and the remaining blood thereof shall he pour out at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. Leviticus 4:25. This teaches that you must give a base to the altar of the burnt offering, meaning that the remainder of any blood placed in the altar must be poured on the base. O Eino Elamus Beach Elamis Bacha Shel Ola Yisod Yisod or Yishmael Kal V'Chomer Mash Yiraim Shein Mechaperin Tunim Yisod Techilat Oila Shmechaperes Einu Din Shitun Yisod. The Brisa continues, or perhaps it's not so. Rather, the verse serves to teach that any sprinkling of blood on the corners of the altar of the burnt offering will be done on a part of the altar where there is a base. Rabbi Shmuel said there is no need for the verse to teach that halacha because it can be derived through kal v'chomer, just as the remainder of the blood, which does not affect atonement. The remainder of the blood, which does not affect atonement, requires pouring on the base of the altar with regard to the initial sprinkling of the blood of the burnt offering, which does affect atonement. Is it not logical that it requires a part of the altar where there is a base? Okay. Amar Rabbi Kiva, ma shirayim sheim mechabrin, ein bayin lechabara tun yisoid techila. Oila, shmechaper zuba lechabara, eino din shetuna yisoid. Similarly, Rabbi Kiva said, just as the remainder of the blood, which does not affect atonement, does not come for atonement, nevertheless requires pouring on the base of the altar. With regard to the initial sprinkling of the blood of a burnt offering, which affects atonement, and it comes for atonement, is it not logical that it requires a part of the altar where there is a base? Im kain, ma Talmud lomar, and Yisod Mizbach ha'olah, ten Yisod Mizbach shalom. The Brisa continues, if so, why must the verse state at the base of the altar of burnt offering, Leviticus 4:25? It is to teach you that you must give a base to the altar of the burnt offering, meaning that the remainder of the blood of the offering must be poured on the base. Amar Mar Yisod Mizbeach V'lo Yisod Mizbeach Hapenimi Hamebayim Le'Legufei Yasher Pesach Ohel Moed Dafka. The Gemara discusses this brayta. The master says, the verse states, at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Leviticus 4:18. This teaches that it must be on the base of the external altar, but not the base of the inner altar. The Gemara asks, isn't that necessary for the matter itself to teach that the remainder of the blood must be poured onto the base of the external altar? The Gemara answers that halacha is derived from which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Leviticus 4:18, referring to the external altar. Therefore, the verse mentions the altar of burnt offering to exclude the base of the inner altar. The Gemara teaches the Brisa teaches with regard to the sin offering of a king. The verse states, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it upon the corners of the altar of burnt offering, and the remaining blood thereof he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. Leviticus 4:25. Going to the next page, just to complete the idea. 51b, top. This teaches you that you must give a base to the altar of the burnt offering. Meaning, wow. is this really... This is a tiny daf. Let me pause this for a second. This is only a few lines. Let me see if this is right. Yes, folks, that is correct. Wow, this Amud is really that tiny. It's only 23 words, this Amud. I didn't think there would be an Amud that small, but I checked and that's what it is. So this is going to be 51 altogether. I won't do A and B, I'll just keep it as one recording. So we're talking about 51b now. This teaches you that you must give a base to the altar of the burnt offering. 10 yesodos be'achshalayna. You must give a base to the altar of the burnt offering, meaning that the remainder of any blood placed on the altar must be poured on the base. The Gemara explains, because if it enters your mind that the verse states this simply to teach, as it is written concerning this offering alone, why do I need these verses with regard to the sin offering of a king? If you would answer, the verses are needed to teach the halacha, that the remainder of the blood must be poured on the external altar rather than on the inner altar, then the question remains, is there any need for the Torah to teach this about the remainder? But the sprinklings of blood themselves are performed on the external altar, so why would one think that the remainder of the blood should be poured on the inner altar? And if you would say that one might mistakenly say that the priest reverses the sprinklings,